This episode is sponsored by TherapyNotes, TherapyNotes.com. Be sure and check them out, and be sure and use the promo code Gordon, Gordon, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. Over 15 years ago, when I started my private practice, I had to learn a lot, and most of it the hard way, and I don't think you need to do the same. Hi, I'm Gordon Brewer, a licensed psychotherapist, and welcome to the Practice of Therapy podcast, part of the PsychCraft network of podcasts. Join me in this journey of discovery as we have conversations with other leaders and professionals in both the mental and allied health fields. Join us as we explore both the business and clinical sides of running a private practice. Hello, folks. I'm Gordon Brewer, and this is episode number 277 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. Glad you've joined me, and hope you're having a good week or weekend whenever you might be listening to this. And I'm looking forward to you hearing from my guest today, Maira Holzmann. And Maira is another clinician that's also doing some coaching around business building, and also just around Maira's kind of niche is doing somatic therapy. And so she talks about a little bit about how she's kind of built around that niche. But one of the things that I loved about our conversation is that Maira delves into a topic that I think is worth, you've heard this topic before on this podcast, but I think like I've said in previous episodes, hearing it a different way kind of resonates in a different way, I think. But talking about our money mindset and just how we might kind of cut ourselves short, and just how we think about business, how we think about spending money, how we think about what we put our time, money, and resources into. And so Maira shares some of her journey with that, and some of the things that, as we talked about, we've learned the hard way along the way. And one of the things I love about Maira is she's got a passion for what she's doing. And I think anytime we have a passion and can share that with others, that comes through. And also we can be of more help to people by doing it that way. So looking forward to you hearing my conversation with Maira. And real quickly here, before we get to that conversation, I'd love for you to go over and check out all the things that we're doing over at the Practice of Therapy. So if you'll go to practiceoftherapy.com, you can learn about the communities that we've got going. We've got the Practice Launch Club, which is geared specifically for those clinicians that are just getting started in private practice and really not wanting to go it alone. And the Practice Launch Club has a whole set of resources that I keep adding to. And so be sure and check it out, practiceoftherapy.com, and you can find everything there. And also, real quickly here, before we get to my conversation with Maira, love for you to hear from one of the members of the PsychCraft network, and also our sponsor of the podcast, TherapyNotes.
Hi everyone, I'm Aaron Potratz.
And I'm Nathan Hawkins. If you don't know us yet, we are the voices behind the Shrink Think podcast, which is part of the PsychCraft network of podcasts.
We are so proud to be a part of this network, along with the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, and the great work he is doing to help people in their journeys.
And if you haven't discovered the Shrink Think podcast, you can find us wherever you listen to your podcast. We'd love for you to join us as we seek to help you with your relationships, your healthcare practices, and your therapy journey.
Join us as we bridge the gap between clients and therapists. And be sure to check us out at shrinkthink.com/podcast and take our free e-course.
And have a great day.
One of the keys to a successful private practice is having the right systems and processes in place to make things run as smoothly as possible. With a system like TherapyNotes, you'll have more time to spend with what matters most, your clients. TherapyNotes is a complete practice management system with everything you need to manage patient records, schedule appointments, meet with patients remotely, create rich documentation, and bill insurance right at your fingertips. Their streamlined software is accessible wherever and whenever you need it. Your clinical records will be secure with less paperwork, which means you can give a much better quality of care. It's the EHR that Gordon uses in his practice. Be sure to check them out today by going to practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes and be sure to use the promo code GORDON to get 2 months free.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to the podcast. And I'm looking forward to you to get to know today Maira Holzmann. Welcome, Maira.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here.
Yes, and Maira is one of those good folks that reached out to me, and we started kind of an online conversation, and I'm really looking forward to you hearing Maira's story. And Maira, like I start with most everyone, why don't you tell folks a little bit about yourself and how you've landed where you've landed?
Sure. My name is Maira Holzmann, and I run a group psychotherapy practice here in Denver, Colorado. I've been doing that for the last 3 years. And I've been a clinician in private practice on and off since 2007, 2009. Wow. Boy, it's been a long time. And I focus on what my practice does is focus on somatic therapy. So I'm running my group practice, I'm seeing clinicians, and I'm also about to launch a coaching course for therapists who want to up-level their private practice. And that launches on Monday. So also the last thing I'll say is that my practice's focus is on helping clients heal from early trauma as well as anxiety. That's our main foci. And then we have other specialties.
Yes. And how many therapists do you have in your practice?
4 total, including me. We just hired 2 new clinicians. Yeah. So we're super excited about that.
Yeah, that's great. Great. So, and so I know in our conversation before we started recording, you had mentioned that you've had a few ups and downs with private practice. And as I like to say, it sounds like your journey's a little bit parallel to mine. It sounds like we got started about the same time in private practice. And as I like to say, I've learned a lot the hard way. It sounds like you have too.
It's funny because I just listened to your podcast episode when you were talking about that. And I was like, oh, we did start our journey at about the same time. Yeah. So, the journey into private practice is an epic one. For all of the people listening, going into private practice has been one of the best things I've ever done in my professional career, apart from training, just because it has really forced me to grow and to evolve. And my hard start was that I started 3 different private practices, all of which that failed, meaning that I couldn't get enough clients. I wasn't making the kind of money that I wanted to be making. And I was basically on my own trying to DIY and bootstrap it. And I think that there is a time and a place for that. Absolutely. And then everything started to change after I bought my first coaching course, similar but different to the one that I'm offering. And that's when I understood that's part of how my money mindset started to change. And one of those first keys in terms of that money mindset. And I think we know this in general from business, with that old phrase that says it takes money to make money. And I wasn't, at the time that I was failing in my 3 previous private practices, I did not have that mindset because I was so afraid of losing the money. And so part of my money mindset that began to evolve is not only do I need to focus on investment versus cost because I'm going to get a return on investment, but also that it really helps to pay people who know way more than I do so that I could get my private practice really launched and up and running. And I haven't looked back since then. And it's been one of the biggest things I do regularly, right? Is invest in myself as a clinician, but also myself as a business person and an entrepreneur, because that is not what I went to school for.
Right. And I can totally agree with that. I mean, that's something I learned along the way too, is that I think our money mindset is that we're so afraid of losing money, kind of that scarcity mentality that it holds us back, and we really don't get ahead. And
we really don't get ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true. And I totally agree too. Every time I've invested in some coaching or masterminds, those kinds of things, I've always gotten the return on the investment by doing that.
I agree completely. And I think that sometimes is a really hard sell for a new clinician who doesn't
Hmm.
know the way because, fear blocks us. It doesn't allow us to see
Right.
into our generous future. And I think that once I figured out that even investing, and then at the time, the investment that I made into my coaching program, I think was like $1,600. This was back in
Hmm.
2016. And it totally launched me and helped me understand so much about
Hmm.
myself. And I just can't recommend it enough for anyone who's listening that's like, oh, I don't want to do that. It's a lot of money. It's really an important one to make. It'll fast track you towards greater success and moving in the direction in your career and mental health that
Hmm.
you want.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what were some of the changes in your mindset you had to kind of overcome?
Well, one of the biggest ones was cost versus investment. I mentioned that just a little bit earlier. And I think
Hmm.
when I started out, I was looking at everything as a cost, meaning I was simply going to lose that money. If I spent $500 in ad revenue, it was lost. And one of the things that my very first coaching program taught me was that we basically did a breakdown of, okay, if you invest $500 and you get one client out of that, let's say worst case scenario, you just get one client, not even zero, but just one. And then we did the math about if that client stayed with me for a minimum of 8 sessions. And the way that I work, the way that our practice works is we're doing a lot of depth work. So our clients stay with us for at least 1 year, if not longer. And once I figured out that money was just sort of like a lead, it was like, hey, I'm going to give you a little and then I'm going to get a lot in return. That was one of my biggest mindset shifts. And then
Hmm.
the other thing that I really focused on, and I'm sure that you can relate, and I think it's true in our field, that scarcity is in all caps all the time.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I don't know what it is about our training, or maybe it's just the culture that we live in. But that scarcity mentality, which breeds fear, stops all innovation and creativity.
Hmm.
And once I started to figure out that this scarcity was this entity, like a bad roommate in my house,
Hmm.
right? Just like
Hmm.
sucking all the air out of the room and telling me all my ideas
Hmm.
were bad and who did I think I was. I figured out that it was time to really focus on that. And it's something that I work on regularly, right? I'm always trying to travel that distance between fear and creativity and scarcity and abundance. And I think it's a worthy endeavor for most of us to focus on how we can get out of scarcity mentality, because the truth is there's abundance in a lot of things, not just in material wealth, but in resources, in emotional support, and people that care about you, and ideas. And
Right.
I think that clinicians who are starting on this path, they need support doing that. So that was a really big mindset shift for me, is how do I go? Because I know I'm in scarcity, and I know because I'm scared
Hmm.
and my body's tight and constricted, to go from that to something that's a little bit more relational and free flowing, where there's this easy back and forth. And then the last thing I'll say about this is I have a
Hmm.
dear friend who's a lawyer, and she does a bunch of coaching things. And she, on a live Facebook call or something like that, she said something really simple. And this is what she said. She said, money comes and money flows. And for whatever
Hmm.
reason, that just completely stuck with me. And I kind of live by that. I don't, yeah, money goes out, but money also comes in. And so when I have that relational dynamic where, money, the third piece is money is energy. So if I'm putting energy into things I want to be doing that is joyful and that is aligned and, about doing good in the world, then it's easy for that abundance to come back to me.
Right, right. Yeah. And I think money is such an emotional issue for most folks. And I think the more we can look at money in terms of it just being a resource and being more, always get objective and subjective mixed up, but I think being more subjective, I think that's the objective, or yeah, you know what I mean,
I do.
of looking at the data rather than making emotional decisions about money, of really looking at the numbers. And that's been something that I think is a lot of times we we can get stuck in. We make mistakes like that. I've got a whole story I could tell just about how I made some decisions early on in my group practice that were emotional decisions rather than data-based decisions, and it came back to bite me. So, I mean, yeah.
I'm nodding my head vigorously because I've made so many of those mistakes. And one thing I appreciate about where we're at in the conversation right now that I think all your listeners will need to hear is that mistakes are part of it. And, I tend to think of them as experiments. Like, okay, if I put money into this, or if I do this, how is that going to work? And I remember when I started out thinking like it was, I don't know what, this was my naivete. I just sort of thought like, well, if I put up a website and I really spend a lot of time focusing on the words and making, everything on the website is just so, then people will come. And we slapped up a website and nobody came. So, mistakes and experimentation, decide which language you want to use. But I really like the idea of experimentation because you just don't know. And every mistake that I made was a huge, huge learning opportunity. And I agree with you. That's one of the things I had to learn is not make these emotional decisions, but be more and more and more data driven, which is an ever evolving process for me.
Right. Yeah. So I'm curious when you were talking about your website and putting it up there and the struggle you had in getting clients, what was kind of the break in that for you? How did you overcome that to start getting clients?
Well, I had, as I told you, I'd had 3 previous failed private practices and I was hustling. I mean, I was doing everything I could. I did a bunch of networking at that time. So I was going to all of these meetings, which is very labor and time intensive to go and meet all these people, exchange cards, and then, typically never hear from them. Not typically, but sometimes that would happen. And everything started to shift when I took the leap and I left my agency job. And now it was go time. And I didn't have my private practice was not up and running. I was not doing it at the same time where I was working and then trying to set up this private practice. I kind of realized that I was simply done working at the agency that I was working at. And then I quit without any plan in place. And so I was hustling my butt off. And as part of that hustle, I invested in that very first coaching program. This is when I was here in Denver. And that was the thing. It literally, like I can look back on all of my notes and everything that I ever wrote down for that course. And it was illuminating for me how much I didn't know. And once clients started rolling in, there's this kind of high that happens when you do that, when you get that first client. And I don't take insurance and, I charge pretty premium fees here in Denver. And I just kind of got hooked on getting clients in and then supporting them and then watching, in that first year that I had taken that course and launched into private practice for the 4th time, I missed 6 figures by 10K, which is a pretty good year. And I was like, oh, I can do this. And I think that was really the turning point for me because I was scared the whole time and I was full of self-doubt because I'd just never done this before. And when I finally got to that place 6 months after starting to take my course where I had a wait list and I was charging what I wanted to, because that was really the end of my dream. That was all that I ever wanted. I was like, wow, this is amazing. I could keep doing this. And I did. I just kept doing it. And so that experience, that embodied experience of I can is worth everything. I mean, it's worth more than its weight than I ever paid in any coaching course or mastermind I've ever participated in. Just this knowing that I can. And that is awesome.
Yeah. I think it's interesting is for people that are going into private practice initially, the one thing they have to be aware of is that there's this kind of this momentum that happens. I think once you get a certain number of clients and it just it keeps going from there. But when you're getting to that momentum, I think people tend to give up too quickly with that.
Yeah. And or they just stay really afraid and keep doing the same thing, like not investing in ads or finding different ways to be a practitioner. So yeah, I think you're right. Once the momentum is going, at least my experience has been once I had momentum, then it never slowed down. I mean, my practice has been full. We've had wait lists forever. I have raised my rates 3 times or something like that in the last year. And I'm also delivering clinical excellence. So, this isn't, of course, just about the business side, but I'm really in the business of helping people heal, as you are and as all of your listeners are. And that was another piece for me. It wasn't so much a money mindset shift, but it was more around really getting clear about my deep why of being a therapist. Because as soon as I could come home to that concept of like, here's the reason why I'm doing this, here's the story of my own life that backs it up, then it wasn't like selling myself as a clinician. It was more like, hey, do you want to work with me or not? Are we a good fit? Because I really have something to offer you. And that's related to that I can embodiment, which is like, not only can I get clients in and make great money, but I also have seen success with a lot of my clients. And that really helps, because then when I get on consult calls, there's this kind of confidence or ease that shows up in the conversation. And what I have heard from clients is, I knew within the first 10 to 15 minutes that you were the one for me. And, I have a whole thing that I do. Like I have a whole process when it comes to consult calls, because people are calling because they need help and they want to make sure that you're the person that can help them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
So, thinking about the being able to invest in your practice, what were the areas of investing now that you're doing some coaching and I'm sure it's much more involved than just a few bullet points, but what areas do you see that people should be investing in?
The first two things that come to mind that were part of my process is ad budgets. So I faithfully spent, I think at the time I could spend $200 a month on Google ads. My budget for my group practice is a lot different now. It's definitely a lot more than that, but that would be one of the things, is investing in ads. And then the other thing is SEO. I mean, SEO is, for me, who does not have a super great detail-oriented brain, I was just not willing to try and figure that out. That was part of my first coaching program, is we had to figure out all of the terms and then take out all of the terms in order to make sure that the website was SEO, search engine optimized. And when I hired someone to be able to do that, it just sort of changed the game, because then people could find me. And then, of course, my website SEO was building because people were coming to find me. They were looking for my name. They were looking for the approach that I use in therapy. So those would be the two things I would invest in, because the website is, your website is your calling card, and you want that calling card to be optimized, as I'm sure you know. So those would be the two things that I invested in that had huge returns on investment. And I was willing to sort of like, quake in fear about whether or not I had lost $500 in ad revenue, only to find out that it gave me more than if I had not do that.
Right.
Yeah.
I totally agree, of course, with that. I think, your website is your face in the public. And I think that's having it optimized is just going to be a huge help. I can remember I was bootstrapping a lot of that stuff along the way. And I think the thing about bootstrapping, I think in those initial stages, when you have the time to bootstrap, it's a good investment of your time. But once you start seeing clients, it's much better return on your investment to hand those things off and start outsourcing and having other people do that.
I love what you just said, because for all your listeners, no matter where they're at, if you're in a place where you have time, I mean, yes, bootstrap it, because you can research, you can experiment, you can do all of these kinds of things. And you're so right. As soon as my client caseload got full, I suddenly was the person that was doing, I was always the person doing everything, but I was doing admin, I was doing the marketing, I was doing the website checking, I was doing everything. And it made me hate my practice. Like, let me just talk about this for 1 second. I got burnt out at least 2 or 3 times in this sort of ramp up to being, a full in my private practice. And I think it's really important for folks to hear that as you get more successful, you actually need more help. And one of the best pieces of advice that I ever heard, and it's 2 things. One is, I heard this phrase, new level, new devil. And, the advice from one of my dear friends was like, what got you to this level of success is awesome, but it's not going to be the same set of skills or mindset that you're going to need in order to get the next level of success. You're going to actually have to expand your repertoire. And it was so helpful for me to hear that, because every time my practice has expanded and I've gotten to this new level, boy, the fear and the resistance and I just should call it quits just shows up. And I also want to name that piece because it's just super normal. And resistance is a force of nature on its own. And it's something that anyone that's an entrepreneur, but also, particularly in our world, we have to grapple with. Because, one of the messages that we're given a lot is that we're not really here to make a lot of money. That's one of the sort of cultural trainings that we get as clinicians. And I want to be one of the first people to say, like, I can help people. I really want to help people, and I really want to make a lot of money. And that was a mindset shift that took me a while. I mean, honestly, Gordon, that is a hard thing for me to say, because when I've said that in therapeutic circles, I get, I perceive this kind of judgy look, like, oh, that's really, as if I'm being unethical. And I just really want people to hear, you can really want to help people and make a lot of money. And that's great. That's great. That's great for, your community, your clients. That's great for you.
Right. Yeah. And if you think about it, it's for some reason in our profession, unfortunately, for people at a master's level or above, we're some of the lowest paid people, with a professional degree. And so, and I think that's something that we need you need to work and advocate for and changing and that sort of thing, because listen to me, people, you're worth you're worth it. You're worth it. I mean, you've put in all these hundreds of hours to get your education and then work towards licensure and all those kinds of things. And you know a lot of stuff. And so
that's right.
People need that.
Yeah. And, the other thing I'll throw out there, because I've been paying attention to this, to what I call emotional labor, like that as a therapist, that's what we're doing all of the time. Is we are, even when we're not with our clients, we are still even just holding the container for ourselves so that we can be thriving and grounded and regulated when we show up for sessions. Right. So I love what you just said. I think that clinicians really need to know that they are worth getting paid really well and having a life where they get to, do good, live large, and thrive more. That's the whole, that's the whole jam. That's the whole point.
Right. Yeah. So, and I think, and I hear in you, Maira, just kind of the same passion I have, and which I know, without having to ask this, I know that's probably what led you to creating your coaching course.
Yes.
Coaching program. So say more about that.
Yeah. I mean, this is, so I take a lot of trainings. It's one of the things I love to do. I invest in a lot of trainings. I'm a somatic therapist. And I often feel a little bit out of place in those trainings, not for anything other than the reason that when I hear people talk about their practices and I hear, the amount of money that they're charging, and these are people who are oftentimes more seasoned than I am. I mean, I've gone to a lot of trainings with clinicians who have been in the field for 20, 30 years. And I just got really tired of hearing people live and breathe scarcity without even knowing that they were doing it. I remember one time I was sitting in a car with 3 therapists. We were on our way, all of us on our way to the airport after a training. And the clinicians started talking about their insurance rates and, that which insurance offered the best rates. And so because these were people all from the same area. And then they started talking about how it was unethical to not take insurance. And I said something. I was like, well, I don't take insurance and I charge a premium fee. And they all looked at me and got really quiet and basically stopped talking. And I was like, wow, what's happening right here? I just talked about premium fees, how I don't take insurance. I'm the most unethical one in the car. And I get tired of really feeling like that. And also, I'm surrounded by fabulous, super talented, super dedicated and committed clinicians. And they're charging 120 per session or 150 per session. And that's fine. And I'm also just like, you've been in the field for 30 years, right? And for some people, they don't need to. It's totally fine. Maybe they have, like a pot of cash that they can work on. But I started the business coaching course because I want to change the culture in which we practice, where it's all about sacrifice and burnout and overworking. And somehow those are badges of honor. They're not badges of honor. They're part of a system that is oppressive. And then, one of the things that I'm trying to do in this coaching course is really help people be more soul aligned in whatever they're practicing. And I make a distinction between creating a soul aligned practice and an ego one. So when I started to get successful, it was a totally ego led practice. I was all about the stats of how much money I was making and how many clients I had and, the status of it in my own mind. And then within 9 months, I was getting pretty burnt out and had to, I went from seeing 30 clients a week pre-pandemic then to, something much less, like 14 or 18 or something like that. And I really want to support clinicians in thriving more, because what I know about myself is that when I'm getting paid well, when I don't have to worry because I'm burnt out or hustling really hard to get clients, I'm a way better clinician. I can just be more regulated, present, and grounded. And I think that that's one of the things that clinicians might not totally get, right, in the midst of their guilt of feeling bad about whatever. And I just want to basically help clinicians free themselves from this scarcity mindset and then really thrive in ways that they most want to be able to thrive. Because isn't that kind of what we all want to do, is thrive versus survive?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm passionate about doing this. I'm really excited to start the process of coaching and see how that can go, because you've been through it, I've been through it. And I think all of us go on similar journeys for those of us that are like exploring going into private practice.
Right.
And, having a successful solo private practice allowed me to launch into a group practice and is allowing me to launch into, launching a coaching course for clinicians. So that's why I want to do this coaching
course. That's awesome.
Course.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm reminded of something a friend and colleague of mine, and you might know her as well, Casey Compton, talks about lifestyle congruence. And so I think a lot of times that's something that we need to really think about with our practices and with what we do is, as I like to say, and people hear from me all the time, what is your why behind it? Yes. And so I think that's, when you mentioned the soul of your practice, I think that's really what came to mind for me is, what is your why? Why are you doing this? Yeah. And, if it's just to compete and all of that kind of thing, you're probably going to get burned out pretty quickly. But if it's more about, okay, this is what feeds me, this is what enriches me, that's really where I think people thrive.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the deep why is one of the places to start with clinicians. In the coaching program that I created, the deep why is one of the things that I lead with. Right. And then the other thing is like, what's your life experience been as a clinician? Because we didn't get here by accident. Most clinicians that I know got here because they were working on their own stuff and they needed to find a way. That was definitely true for me. This archetype of a wounded healer isn't a bad archetype. It's a wounded healer turns into one of the best healers because they know how to support people because they've been through it. And I think that if clinicians could spend some time, and this is just even in the basics of, like, for me, this is like a basic in private practice, is like, why are you here and why are you doing what you're doing? And what in your life experience has informed this, right? Because if you can also talk about that then on your website and with your clients, then you get this sort of like human element, right? So that we are, in my world, we're partners together on this path of healing. I know a lot. I'm trained really well. And you know a lot. And you have also been trained really well by your life, by circumstance, by a lot of things. And my job is to partner with clients so that we can walk the path together. Yeah. And, that to me is one of the things that has kept my private practice really strong, is because of word of mouth. My clients feel cared for, they feel safe, and they're also getting the transformative and transformation and healing that they came in to see me for. And so they're diehard fans. And I don't say that from an ego place, but it's more of a mutual, like, I'm their diehard fan and they're my diehard fan because we're just in this together.
Right.
So
right. That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. I love this stuff. Tell folks how they can get in touch with you and how they can find out about your coaching.
The coaching program for therapists that I'm launching is called More Thriving Therapists with an S at the end of therapist.com. And it's an online coaching program. And then I also offer somatic therapy, or my team and I offer somatic therapy at my website at www.somatictherapypartners.com.
Awesome. So, well, Maira, I hope that we can have a conversation again. Thanks for being on the podcast. Well, big thanks to Maira for joining me on the podcast. And I very much appreciate her enthusiasm and her passion for what we do and how we do things. And she has learned a lot, as I have along the way. As we mentioned, we've kind of started our journey into private practice around the same time. And I think what she says about our mindset around our money and just thinking about investing in things is spot on. And I would say make note of that for yourself. And and so thanks again, Maira, for being on the podcast. And also be sure and check out her things. You'll find links here in the show notes and the show summary. And I think she's got some great stuff out there. And I'm excited for her with her coaching program that she's coming out with. So also big thanks to our sponsor of the podcast, TherapyNotes. And you can find out more about them by going to practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes. They are one of the leading, if not the leading, electronic health record system for mental health providers in private practice. And as you've heard me say before, it's who I use in my practice, and absolutely love the platform and what they're doing. And they're all the time updating what they do and the different things that they're adding to it. And it's just really a great platform. I can't say enough about it. And be sure and use the promo code Gordon, just GORDON, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. And I think if you try them out, you'll probably stick with them. That would be my guess. And as I mentioned in the beginning as well, be sure and check out all the resources at our website, practiceoftherapy.com, and in particular, the different communities that we've got going. Love to have you be part of those. And so you can find out more about all of that at practiceoftherapy.com, and hope to be talking with you soon. And be sure and check out the Psychcraft Network. I got a lot of great colleagues on there. We're up to about 9 different podcasts now. So psychcraftnetwork.com, and you get to learn a lot more stuff from those folks as well. So take care, folks. Hope you have a great rest of your week or weekend, and we'll be talking with you again next week. You've been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. You can find out more about the other great podcasts in the network by visiting psychcraftnetwork.com. And if you haven't done so already, please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com and get your free private practice startup guide, along with a lot of other great resources and webinars and free things just by visiting. Also, be sure to follow us wherever you might be listening to your podcasts. This podcast is intended to be educational in purpose and is not intended to give legal, accounting, or counseling advice. If you need a professional, find the right person for that.